Haze pollution from raging peatland and forest fires in Indonesia has long been choking its ASEAN neighbors. Just last year, haze levels in Singapore, as measured by the Pollutant Standards Index or PSI, hit a hazardous level of over 300, one of its worst on record. Haze pollution is a man-made problem which is exacerbated by the dry season and usually occurs from June to September during the southwest monsoon season that accompanies reversing winds. Large-scale burning, a cheap and easy way to clear land for crops, not only damages the environment but also poses a serious health hazard. Speaking at the Sustainable World Resources Dialogue organized by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, the head of Indonesia's Peatland Restoration Agency says there is zero chance that the region will experience the same bout of haze this year as it did in 2015.
We have witnessed how the fires, disasters, economic as well as ecological disasters have occurred in Indonesia, fundamentally very bad in 2015. The government was shocked to see what happened in 2015, that more than 60 million of Indonesians suffer from the haze. All level, not only the president or the vice president, but the whole cabinet is thinking out loud how to stop this from happening again. I cannot emphasize more that how serious now Indonesia is preparing actions, program, changing policies to prevent fires from happening.
In 2015, more than 2.6 million hectares of land and forests were burnt in Indonesia. That's about 4.5 times the size of Bali, releasing over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the air. The toxic smoke from the fires suffocated millions of people across Indonesia, with more than 500,000 suffering from acute respiratory tract infections. Indonesia's Jokowi administration has pledged to reduce carbon emissions by 29% by 2030, having taken steps to extinguish the forest fires. It went as far as to revoke the licenses of 3 companies implicated in slash and burn farming. However, critics argue that those measures don't go far enough, pointing to the lack of infrastructure and firefighting capabilities in some regions. Swifter action is needed considering the huge costs arising from the fires and haze in 2015. A recent estimate by the World Bank puts fire and haze-related losses in Indonesia at $16 billion, while others estimate a bill that's double that figure. As the sense of urgency grows to resolve what's become an annual phenomenon, the Singapore Institute of International Affairs' third Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources examines how governments and industry leaders can reach a regional consensus and recommit themselves to sustainable growth.
Quite immediately, industry, regulators, and policymakers must consolidate the lessons learned from the last bout of haze and fires and take on new best practices to address this problem. Looking out into the medium term, there needs to be a shift in the resource sector from the present day to a much more sustainable, robust way of managing and developing resources. There is, of course, a growing interest and engagement with the key and leading industry players, and a number of them, I'm proud to say, have engaged with the SIIA and the SWR over these 3 years we've been holding this dialogue. They are no angels. They're trying to make money, which is fair. The whole of Singapore is about making money. But the way they're trying to make money is now becoming much more long-term and must bring into that calculation the question of sustainability, of reputation, and, of course, of fair dealing.
Getting the resources sector to adopt sustainable business practices is key, but are they doing enough?
We will ask our 2 panelists to begin with some brief remarks about their own experiences. RGE, of course, is based in Indonesia, has been one of the leading pulp and paper companies, using quite a lot of peatland. And AA is in Thailand, where they've also, and other countries too, where they've also been producing one of the largest pulp and paper stocks.
From the perspective of the pulp and paper industry, there are a few trends we're seeing globally right now. There's a significant shift of production of pulp and paper from the developed countries into Asia. Asia is now becoming a key production center for pulp and paper. Another thing we're seeing is that despite the adoption of digital technology today, paper is still very much alive and well. Therefore, the shift in production base into Asia requires us to look at the resources that we have and how we can manage them sustainably to continue our production here.
RG, we're focused on both pulp and paper and palm oil, but at the crux of it all, we are about long-term businesses. Our commitment is very simple. So every hectare of plantation we have, we're committed and have done so to conserve and restore 1 hectare of conservation and natural forests. So we're 90% up to our target. We have 480,000 hectares of plantation. We've conserved and restored 400,000 hectares of both peatland and mineral soil conservation areas. So for us, it's just beyond producing. As a company, we believe in the notion of production and protection, where each company can actually go above and beyond just producing products, but also to protect land outside our concessions in the conservation areas as well as the restoration area, both in peatland and other soils.
In Thailand, and with AA, we have come up with a unique Asian solution to sourcing the wood. And our system, we base it on 2 models. How can we maintain our presence with the environment in mind? And how can we engage the local communities? We don't want farmers to be displaced from their lands. We need them to actually stay on their land and continue to grow the rice that they do and to help us grow our trees.
We experience some challenges on the ground in various areas, including fire incidences nearby our concessions. And at the crux of the problem, we realized that beyond suppression, as Pat Nazir said, we have to change the conversation to prevention. From the learnings that we've had, we've shared this amongst our colleagues with other companies, and we've formed a fire-free alliance just recently in March this year to focus on prevention on the ground, engaging communities, providing alternatives, as well as giving a stick and carrot mechanism. Each villages are incentivized to actually prevent the fires from beginning in the first place.
We have some companies who are very progressive in palm oil sector or in pulp and paper and forestry. They have joint sustainable initiative or certification scheme for many years, even more than a decade. To work with them, I believe it will be not difficult. But there are also a range of companies who is quite new with this concept or who have very bad experience working with civil society or even government. So convincing those groups, I think, will be quite a challenge.
Coming up, with high stakes in the industry, find out how governments and corporates are helping small farmers adopt sustainable practices as they cash in on the palm oil trade. From confectionery, cosmetics to baked goods, palm oil is found in almost everything we use. A majority of the world's palm oil is produced in Southeast Asia, with Indonesia and Malaysia the biggest producers. Armed with deep pockets, some big corporates have taken concrete steps to green their supply chains. However, small farmers, often strapped for cash and resources, struggle to catch up. To put things into perspective, it costs $7 per hectare to clear land by fire, compared to clearing land by machinery, which costs about 20 times more. No small issue given that small-scale farmers, those with plots of less than 25 hectares, account for roughly 40% of total production.
Instead of using fires, the government, including local government, can provide alternative by saying, hey, we can provide you excavator or handheld tractors. You can use it and you don't have to pay. For the first year, for example, we provide the operation cost. For the second year, you have to pay, but only this small amount. On the third year, and so on and so on.
Education and government aid are pivotal in weaning smallholders off unsustainable practices, but big manufacturers also have an important role to play.
For Musimas, we have been linking a lot to the smallholders in different settings. So we have smallholders that are linking to, it's called the scheme KKPA. They have been linking to us in that way that we said, okay, we are certifying all our mills and all our plantations, but we don't exclude our smallholders. We bring them into our certification scheme and help them as well to implement the good practices so that we can at least be interlinked on the same sort of supply, and they are part of our supply.
Following in Musimas's footsteps is Clariant, a leading specialty chemical firm that recently launched a new initiative to certify smallholders in their supply chains over a 5-year period.
Our focus on the project is that we are targeting around 500 farmers, 500 small producers, which we want to lift up to the standards in terms of no deforestation, no peatland use, and social correct behavior. It is about a social and environmental and economic dimension. So economic, they have to understand, a small producer has to understand also what's in it for me. Economically, that means that improving his yield, getting access to a global market, seeing the whole value chain and being placed in there gives him a sustainable advantage, not only of the contract period of the 5 years of the project which we run in spots, but even beyond.
On the ground, the Jokowi administration is working towards preventing fire outbreaks. Here, Indonesia's neighbors can lend a helping hand.
I believe Singapore can help a lot in terms of market penetration, marketing of products that grow well from peatland, and investment. When we want to launch these millions of hectares being replanted for cultivation area, not conservation areas, being planted with crops that grow well, we need investment. We need to build a good package for investment and banks to come up to join the project, and the project provide the financial assistance for farmers to grow.
As some of the big corporates and governments lead the charge for change, the Singapore government says that consumers too must recognize their responsibility with the choices they make.
As consumers, we should now start buying and using products from companies that have pledged to be socially responsible. The Singapore government will also do its part as a major consumer. From the third quarter of 2016, the government will only procure printing paper products that carry the Singapore Green Label. We'll also spearhead efforts in fighting climate change by procuring electric products that have been certified as being highly energy efficient. Through our efforts, we hope to spur individuals and businesses to likewise make a deliberate choice to support environment sustainability.
More from SIIA's third Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources coming up. Find out how the financial sector can play a part to influence the agroforest industry to adopt more sustainable practices.
There's a growing recognition that adopting environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG, practices positively affect long-term, risk-adjusted returns and high ESG ratings. More often than not, correlates with a lower cost of capital. It's a sustainable way to run businesses and a hedge against reputational and environmental risk. Banks and investment institutions will therefore be promoting their clients' interests by encouraging the wider adoption of ESG practices.
The financial sector plays a pivotal role in channeling money towards environmentally friendly projects and raising the bar on sustainable financing and investment. Financial institutions in Indonesia, China, and Singapore are taking the lead by adopting environmental, social, and corporate governance practices.
Let me brief you on the unique roles of Indonesia Financial Services Authority. This Financial Services Authority, actually, according to the mandate, is basically responsible for supervising and ensuring the healthiness level of the financial condition of each single financial institution in Indonesia. In Indonesia, in addition to focus very much on the healthiness level of the financial condition, then we ask by our regulation also to facilitate and bring the important topics, including sustainable finance.
On the challenges facing financial institutions in implementing a sustainable finance roadmap, here's what SIIA's third Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources Finance panel had to say.
Not only at the bank's level, but also at
I think increasingly, business leaders need to also think of their role being a very important role to promote sustainable financing in the future. First, it's important to have a good framework, right? Next is how do we then leverage on that framework to work with our customers, to encourage them, to support and incentivize them to continue to raise their standards around sustainable business. Then third is how do we then support the rest of the industry to influence or to shape policies as well as share best practices.
I think China's government and also the public, the general public have already realized this problem, and China need to find a way to do the economy transition to the green economy transition. And so finance plays a very important role in green economy transition. Compared with the weak environmental regulations, actually China's financial regulations have strong influence on the financial institutions and their clients. You know, because most of our important financial firms actually state-owned. So the regulations could have a strong influence on them.
If I could ask you, you mentioned how the regulators of China, of course, have very strong direct influence over the banks, since the banks are mainly state-owned. So has this message started to, in a way, be digested by the banks through the regulatory pressure?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, in China, the green finance is not a new word. The rudiment of green credit policy actually acted in 1995, and then from 2006 there are three green financial policies. It's a green credit, green securities, and green insurance policies were issued one by one. But it's the feedback is weak.
I heard that some Indonesian banks are now starting to scrutinize. I read that Bank Mandiri, the biggest bank in Indonesia, have said no more loans to, is it Peatland, I think. Is that true?
Well, it's true that we have the first batch of 8 banks, kind of piloted the awareness and the implementation of the sustainable finance. It is very important to recognize, in particular, perhaps not only in Indonesia, most of emerging market economies, you know, they working very hard to convince that major banks in their jurisdiction really equipped with better understanding dealing with this, you know. So assistance for bank to work together with the clients and then assisting the client, but at the same time, I think also improving banks' own capacity, understanding of opportunity that open wide, on this sector.
But what we actually really want to do is to work with clients, because when this client walks away, he can go to another bank potentially, and life goes on. What we really want to do is work with our clients so that they understand there is a way to operate sustainably. And we want to help them reach that. The current haze problem is a complex issue, and ABS guidelines is definitely not the silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. But what the guidelines will do is set the next stage for the banking industry in Singapore to have a more structured and transparent framework to develop and implement responsible financing.
From the smallholder who may have 2 hectares, through a very long supply and supporting chain, up to the rather technical areas of financial regulation, what banks do or don't do when it comes to dealing with their customers. And that sometimes defies how we want to think about issues like resources and the haze. For the short term, very simple things like much quicker fire response, much better efforts at fire prevention. But equally for the middle to longer term, I think we really heard some more technical but very compelling stories of change, how companies are starting to deal with their supply chain, starting to emphasize the need to certify, and of course, with all the complications between the different certification standards. Always, of course, to remain transparent and accountable. I really do think that compared to 3 years ago, let alone 97, 98, we have come some way. These are brave words because right now, if you look at the sky, it seems we're completely failing again. But that's the difference between the short term and the middle term. I don't think that haze will be unavoidable in the coming months, but I hope we see cause to be slightly more optimistic